Hi, my name is Caleb D. Wilson. I believe that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. And we have with us Rabbi Darin Katz. Darin Katz, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're going to be talking about Hanukkah because we're in the Hanukkah season. And, Rabbi, I did do a video about some of the reasons why Jesus connects to Hanukkah. And I think that you are definitely much more seasoned and more able to articulate this in grander ways than I can. So I want to ask you, why do Jews and Gentiles, why would you recommend Jews and Gentiles to celebrate Hanukkah?
That's a good question, and it's one I've been pushing for years. I don't want to say it's controversial because that's negative, and that's not what it is. I think the biggest thing is, especially for Gentile believers, is they might say, "What's the point for us? Why would we do this?" And I don't mind that. And my general answer with these questions, especially with Gentiles getting into Jewish things, is to say, depending on how it relates to Jesus, not just in a general sense, but in his role as Messiah, not just of Israel, of everyone, that's how you measure it. So you ask yourself, does Hanukkah have anything to do with Jesus? Well, obviously it does because he's Jewish, he had to do it. That aside, does it have anything to do with the work that Jesus did and how he did it? And the answer, I believe, is yes. The easiest layer to get into that on is the fact that in John, and I love this. I mean, if this wasn't in John 10, it would be a lot harder for me to promote Hanukkah to believers that are not Jewish. But in John 10, we have the story of Jesus, and John intentionally notes that Jesus was in Solomon's colonnade, and it was the festival of dedication, which is Hanukkah. And here's what we're going to note, this appears in the gospel. This is not some extract from somewhere else. This is in the gospel. So that begs the question, okay, well, why is it in the gospel? Now, we can break this down very quickly and tell me if I'm saying too much here because I don't want to hijack this, but how I analytically would look at it. Number one, okay, it's in the gospel. So now we know that it's got to do with everyone, even though we know the gospel is Jewish and it's primarily to Israel and then to the nations, all of that, okay, no problem. But this is in this gospel that we know, and Gentile believers for generations have been celebrating as they should. Okay, so if we know that, now we ask the question, well, if Gentiles read these gospels, which they do, and this story is so deliberately put in John's gospel, there's dialogue around it. And it's not just general dialogue. You can't just say, oh, well, okay, yeah, it's a Jewish discussion that they had and that's it. Like there's nothing more to it. It's way more complex than that, because what happens is the topic of Messiah comes up. And we all know that even Gentile believers are very, very much invested in what's the issue of Messiah? How does that work? And they're looking for Messiah too. Even though it's a Jewish concept, Gentile believers are looking for the Messiah too, as they should. So with that in mind, you look and you say, okay, well, if this idea is in John, it's in the gospel, it's about Jesus, it centers on Jesus, and the topic of Messiah comes up, there's just no way that you can say this is just a random event that really just should be overlooked. So all I actually need to say is that, well, it's got to do with messiahship, and clearly Jesus is presented as Messiah in that story in order for me to actually sell it. But I'm going to go deeper than that. What I'm going to say is, if we look back at the story of what Hanukkah is, and I do that, then I say, okay, so Hanukkah is actually about the rededication of the temple after it was defiled. Now again, Gentile believers might say, well, yeah, you see, but that's not for me because I'm not part of that story. That's not my thing. And I'd say, but just hold on a bit. I'd ask them, do you pay attention to Daniel? Do you pay attention to the book of Daniel and Daniel's prophecies? Which they obviously do. They know that even in Daniel's prophecies, there's talk about the prince, about the Messiah to come, about the who would be cut off from his people. They know it's Jesus. So I'd say, great, because you should. You can't avoid that for the same reason, because it's so centrally fixated on Jesus. Great. Okay. Here's the part maybe a lot of believers don't realize. While they are taking eschatological ideas out of Daniel, which I don't mind that they're doing because it's there, what I like to tell them is, do you realize that Daniel's actually first talking about the original Hanukkah that happens just over 160 years before Jesus? And that's what maybe a lot of people don't realize. Then what I say too is note this, that if Hanukkah didn't happen the way it did, and if God didn't deliver Israel the way he did through the Maccabees, there'd be no Jesus to talk about. Now that amps it up a lot because, well, if there was no Jesus to talk about, there's no one for the Gentiles to put their faith in terms of the Messiah coming. So that amps up why it has value. Even if a Gentile believer had to say, okay, you know what, at the absolute bare minimum, I acknowledge Hanukkah and I'm grateful for Hanukkah, because if Hanukkah didn't happen, Jews would have been completely assimilated into Greek culture and there would be no Judaism left. Now, of course, God would never allow that, but just looking at it from the perspective of why, I mean, you don't have to ask me why Jews do it generally, because the answer could just be, oh, it's a Jewish thing. And a lot of people wouldn't care further. But we mainly are trying to figure out, why do Gentiles do this? And that's literally because of Jesus. Okay, so that links to him. And so another element that's worth noting, which I know is very prevalent in Christian logic in any case, which could only add value to them doing it, is the fact that Hanukkah is about literally standing your ground for what you believe and not being assimilated into the world. That's pretty much a Christian message in any case too. Like, they believe that too. And again, this links to Jesus. So there's that, and that's a very big deal about it. It's, again, I don't know that people can fully appreciate the value of Hanukkah and what it means unless they actually look into the history of it and actually see how many martyrs there were and of what caliber of martyrs there were on the Jewish side, because we refuse to give up our identity to be absorbed by the Greek culture. And again, even in Christianity, we know, depending on where it is in the world, they have the same logic. Martyrdom is a real thing. And so again, all of this, I don't know, I mean, I think I've said enough about it. All of that, Caleb, in a nutshell, why wouldn't every Gentile believer in Jesus be doing Hanukkah alongside Jewish believers in Jesus for that reason? If you get what I'm saying, like, that's, and there's more. I mean, a person could say a lot more about it, but if I nutshell summary again, the reason is because it's about Jesus, and it's not just about him being a Jew in his own right, because I would argue that, Jesus had to do something because he's Jewish. That doesn't mean you have to do it if you're not Jewish. But this Hanukkah story is more than just that. This is not just a random cultural element for Jews to feel happy about being Jewish. It went way beyond that. And we know it's going to have end times relevance too. Now, I know, if I just end off with this part, I know for many Christians, maybe the idea, because I said it a bit earlier, maybe the idea about the temple being in play would put them off. But this is a good opportunity for them to realize that they're misunderstanding Jesus' relationship to that temple. Because yes, Hanukkah is very much about the temple being rededicated too. And Jesus couldn't have been on board with that if, well, he has to be on board with that if in John's gospel he's so intentionally standing in Solomon's colonnade, which is 100% attached to Hanukkah, and the religious leaders around him are even picking up the message so that they're saying, okay, we get it. You're trying to say you're the Messiah. Tell us now, are you the Messiah? Now, Jesus plays hard to get. That's a whole other story for itself. But clearly he's playing that game. He's starting that conversation with them. And this makes it into John's gospel. So, yeah, that's what I would say. I could say a lot more, but literally, even though that sounded long, that is a summary.
Gotcha. Okay. So, but it sounds like, is that Jesus understood Hanukkah and was even at certain locations
Oh,
that
yes.
Hanukkah was operating, or the events of Hanukkah happened at, is what I
Oh,
sounds like I'm
without
hearing.
question. And let's just, now that you've mentioned, let me do another plug for Hanukkah now on that one alone. When we look at the story of Jesus' life, and again, let's look at it from the sake of believers in Jesus that are Gentile that read the Gospels. Okay. If you're reading that stuff, now remember, you know this about me, and this would be controversial to a lot of people, I'm sure, but you know that I say I don't believe Gentiles coming in to discover Jesus for the first time. And note that to discover Jesus for the first time, it's the Spirit that moves you. You're not really reading a text and that wakes you up. If the Spirit uses the text or anyone else, that's just him using extra layer. But at the core of it, who's drawing you to Jesus is the Spirit himself who's been instructed to do that. So when I say I don't believe Christians, Gentile believers. So if you're fresh off the boat, let's just say I get you fresh off the boat, you say, hey, I heard about Jesus and I really want to learn more about him. I've been told to read the Gospels, and you came to me, what would I say? No, don't start with the Gospels. And that sounds heretical, but it's not. I would say start reading Maccabees 1 and 2, because that's the story of Hanukkah. And the reason why I say that is because that story, that history, is what influences completely what becomes the first century situation. Now, on that topic, now let's just say we do get into the Gospels, because clearly that happens inevitably for believers, and that's fine. Now we look at that. Now we ask, okay, so the Gospels, they are Jewish from start to finish. It's a Jewish story. Gentiles are already eavesdropping when they read about Passover, when they read about Pentecost and all of this stuff. It's all Jewish. So you're already in that space. So for Gentiles to think, Gentile believers say, oh yeah, that Hanukkah, that's a Jewish thing. I'm like, no, you're missing it, because everything is a Jewish thing. There's other stuff that's in it too. Everything you've been reading in the Gospels is Jewish too. So Hanukkah is actually on the same plane as the rest of that stuff. So here's the point. We know Jesus so intentionally attaches himself to all the Moedim, to Passover, to unleavened bread, to first fruits, to Pentecost, to trumpets, he does this intentionally, because he can't be the real Messiah if he doesn't do that. Okay, so he's doing that intentionally. So in the same way as you noted, he's intentionally attaching himself to this. If the same thing's happening with Hanukkah, why would we be ignoring it? Why is that not forming part of how we articulate who Jesus is? Because that's what we're doing in any case, Passover, all of those things. We are saying, here's the picture we believe about who and what Jesus is, based on Jewish tradition, based on what has been entrusted to Israel through the Moedim. So I'm glad you pointed it out like that, because yes, Jesus is intentionally connecting himself to cultural, prophetic issues that are not Jewish for the sake of being Jewish. Because as I say too, in Leviticus 23, God does not say these are Jewish feasts, these are Jewish Moedim. What does he say? These are mine. They belong to me. So they belong to God. The fact that us Jews have been given the role of disseminating it and sharing it doesn't mean it's ours. Because if we say that, and this is what I tell a lot of believers who say it, if you say to me that Leviticus 23 are the Jewish feasts, which is obviously wrong, then I can say, Caleb, then you don't have salvation. And that will shock you. And if you challenge it, I'll say, but you said it's a Jewish feast. Passover, Jesus can't be your Passover lamb then, because according to what you're saying, that's a Jewish thing. And that's ridiculous, because that's not the case. So yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because Jesus is attaching himself to these very distinct events.
Yeah, and that brings up something else that I had dug into, where because of the Jewish feasts issue that gets translated a lot, is that in Leviticus 23, the word is not Jewish feasts. The word is actually moed,
Yeah.
which is the same word in Genesis 1 talking about the appointed times.
Right. And that's, again, important because it's you and I to have this meeting, and I use this example often with people to make them understand how weighty it is. We could say, hey, we're going to get together for a podcast. Great. And we can have every intention to do it. It's not just magically going to happen. If I decided to get up, and especially because of our time zone difference, I could decide to get up at 6 o'clock this morning with every intention to have a podcast with Caleb. Caleb is in the middle of his day still because the time zones are different. He might be at work. Now, Caleb gets home late at night and he's like, oh, I'm absolutely ready for this, but I'm already sleeping because of the time zone difference. How do we overcome that thing? We have an appointed time. We choose a time. We go into detail and we say, and we've had to do this before. Okay, what is it like for me right now? Let's test it. Caleb, for me right now, it is 1:23 in the afternoon on Sunday. What time is it by you?
6:23 on Saturday.
Okay, so we would have no chance of meeting up if we didn't put hard and fast measures down for the time that we were going to meet. And so that's it. And you're right. It's a sad misconception that believers have about this concept. When again, I just say to believers, and it works every time, I just say, okay, if you being the proverbial Christian for me now, I say, okay, Caleb, do you ever go to a organized meeting for your faith as a Christian? And you'd say, obviously I do. Like, that's a stupid question. I'd say, okay, so what is that time? Here's the time our church meets. Okay, how about Bible studies? Yeah, this day at this time. Okay, awesome. Prayer meetings. Yes, this day, this time. And if you don't realize it for yourself, which often happens, and I say, do you realize what you've just told me? You've got organized religion. You've got set dates and times. You and your church people for worshiping make appointed times. And that's not a bad thing. But you cannot be undermining God's appointed times as the basis of everything. But then you say, look, we're going to kind of set those aside because we're not Jewish, but we'll make these other appointed times. That's illogical. And that's what we've got to get people to understand. Now, maybe this is worth saying at this point. Am I claiming that Hanukkah is part of the appointed times of Leviticus 23? No, I'm not. I don't need to. That it's not. I don't want to say too much, but I'll have to say this, and you can just question me on this and tell me where you want this to go. Hanukkah is, yes, very much a historical celebration in Jewish history. Fine, it does have that element. However, because Israel doesn't exist for ourselves, nothing that, let's not say nothing, but 99% of what is ours historically still links to our role of being the light to the nation. So inevitably, Gentiles should be going, yes, Hanukkah happened, thank heavens. Same with Purim, the story of Esther. If that didn't go well, again, no Jews, no Jesus, no. So inevitably, there's that for Christians. But on the topic of Hanukkah, here's what's worth noting is the reason why Hanukkah has 8 days attached to it. Besides other traditional stuff that we believe, here's the main very important thing to note. Hanukkah is 8 days because it links to Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And in a nutshell, that story is that because of the time of fighting the Greeks during that period of time, the Levites, my family, the Maccabees, couldn't celebrate Sukkot during those years because they were busy fighting. And so the tradition goes is that Hanukkah is kind of like a delayed Sukkot. And that's why you got the 8 days, because Sukkot would have the 8 days attached to it. Okay, and that's a strong, besides what I've already said about Jesus and Hanukkah and all of that, because that matters, that's another strong element that it actually does then relate to one of the Moedim from Leviticus 23. But to be honestly, I don't even feel the need to build to honestly have to build on all of that evidence. I think the evidence is in place way before that, but it's worth noting, because I don't want any critics to say, oh, he's claiming that it's the same as Leviticus 23. I'm not claiming that. I've never claimed that. I don't need to claim it. It stands strong enough without needing to make it about that. So that doesn't need to be done, but I think it's worth noting that it does connect to Sukkot by virtue of the importance of how worship has to be mimicked on earth as it is in heaven. And that's what strengthens Hanukkah, because again, let's just go back to it once more. It is about the temple. And again, I know a lot of Christians don't have a high view of the temple. It's something that we've got to work on changing to get them educated on why that's not the right approach. But that idea of worship is what the temple was for. So of course Jews are going to be anxious about missing out on celebrating Sukkot. And so Hanukkah, and maybe this is worth noting, Hanukkah is not how would I say, just a random noun. Hanukkah means rededication. And dedication is worship. It was rededicating what was defiled back to God. Obviously, the temple being the core issue there. So Hanukkah itself actually just points to God's temple, to worship, to engaging with Hashem in that way. So yeah, that's another thing worth noting.
I want to peek at something you said. I think it was something like mimicking what is above on earth. And do you think that the temple, because I know people say the temple is a shadow of what is to come, and so I think there's people who might hear that and think, oh, it's a shadow, so therefore now that Jesus has come, then he replaces the need for that. What would you say to how would you explain this mimicking that we do with the temple?
Yeah. So in the first place, if we go right back to Leviticus 23, we know that God has said those appointed times are his, and it's entrusted to Israel, and Israel has to teach the nations. Okay, which whether or not Gentile believers want to believe it, the truth is that Israel, even in our stubbornness, even in our turning away from God at different times, in different ways, in different parts of the global number of Jews, we have been doing just that, because Gentiles could never know of a Jesus if there weren't Jews who were promoting him. So there's that in place. That's number one. Number two, Israel is never given an option to have authentic worship apart from a holy place in a holy space. Okay? So holy place in a holy space. What's the holy place? The temple. What's the
That's
holy
fascinating.
space? It's
So you're
Jerusalem.
suggesting like the omission. The omissions is pretty much the evidence.
You just can't possibly worship God or have authentic worship of God if there isn't the covenant nation Israel, because we are the priests and the teachers. There's just no way around that. If there's not a land for us to gather in, which is Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, if there's not a temple to be officiating that worship from. Now again, Christians might say, oh yeah, but the temple was torn down. That shows Jesus changed everything. I'm like, your gospel contradicts that, because Jesus said that it was his Father's house, and my Father's house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. Now, they're going to tell me that in the gospel, Jesus will, at the end of the gospels, prophetically tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it. I'm like, yes, just calm down. The context is very clear that it states that they thought Jesus meant the actual temple, which he didn't. He meant his body, and it would be raised up. So the temple's left safe and secure. It's not destroyed in Jesus' logic. Furthermore, the burden of proof is on the Christian who believes that about the temple, because as I've said, how do you go from Jesus saying, my Father's house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? Where do you go from there? If the kingdom to come is going to center on the temple being a pivotal place, we know from prophecy that the nations will stream to Jerusalem. Ironically, for tabernacles, Sukkot. And the nations who don't send envoys, it says, will literally be cursed for the next year. They won't have rain. They'll lose crops. They'll have famine. For what? For what reason? For not celebrating Hanukkah, not celebrating Sukkot by sending ambassadors, envoys to Jerusalem. The evidence is overwhelming. There's just no way around it. Now let's break it down to simpler terms. We know even Jesus prays this very Jewish concept that, in the prayer, as it is above, let it be below. What does that even mean? The simplest way to express that, in God's presence, there's perfect holiness, there's worship, there's the various range of supernatural beings that oversee that everything runs in order in creation. So if that's above, how do you mimic that below? Jerusalem, the temple. That's how you do it. So it has to be mimicked there. Now, it doesn't mean that you need a temple in every city. Doesn't mean you need a temple in every country. Doesn't mean Gentiles need to build temples. None of that. That's not necessary. The temple in Jerusalem represents God's throne room. That's what it represents. Now, let's go back to what the critics can say. But you see, that's why you Jews lost it, because you rejected Jesus. So I need to just make sure we don't leave any doors open. So the first point is, no, we didn't all reject Jesus. That's why there were thousands who followed Jesus, as your Gospels tell you, focusing in specifically on the 12 that were his apostles that literally went out and shared the gospel that you couldn't have if Jews didn't keep sharing it. So that's faulty logic too. The fact that the temple's not around, I'm going to give an example. When David was moving the Ark of the Covenant and going back towards Israel, one of his attendants obviously touched it and dies because he's not a Levite in that role, and he tries to steady it and he gets killed. Okay. Technically, David sulks a bit. He had been worshiping God, dancing like a madman, just in absolute freedom, and then he sulks because someone dies from touching the Ark of the Covenant. So in David sulking, what he does is he literally leaves the Ark of the Covenant in Philistine territory because he's sulking now, and he moves on. And what happens is quite funny, but inspiring, because while that happens, the Philistines get blessed. And David hears about this and gets jealous, as he should, because he's left the mark of God's presence from eternity in the midst of Israel's greatest enemy of the time. And here's what's beautiful about that picture. God's holiness will produce blessing wherever it is. So that image that ends up sitting in the Holy of Holies of the temple, that Ark of the Covenant, blesses Israel's enemy because David leaves it with them. So what does David do? Getting jealous, as he should, he promptly runs back and fetches it. And that tells us a lot about the temple itself. That tells us that element of the Ark of the Covenant that contains that holiness factor, that could bless even Gentiles when it was left there. Now, all that has to happen, let's just say the Philistines, you're a Philistine, Caleb. Let's just say Caleb the Philistine, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob clearly has got some magic that our gods don't have because of what you saw happened when that relic was with you, okay? So what's your option? Tell me what you think is your option after that. You now know that this Ark of the Covenant has been moved miles away to Jerusalem. What can you do you think?
Probably want him back.
You could try that. That wouldn't work out. What's your next option?
What would I do if I couldn't get it back? I guess go back to my gods.
You could do that too, but if you were really convinced, as you would be after seeing what you did, couldn't you just take the option to find out how to join Israel?
Yeah.
You could say, effectively, I want to convert. I've seen the power of your God as evidenced through this relic. You get what I'm saying? And doesn't that line up perfectly with what Israel's job is to do, is to show the nations we are the representatives of the one true God. Now watch here. Notice what I said you could do. You could go and follow David. You could follow them back and say, I've seen the power. Notice this to make further evidence. Does the story tell you that David slaughtered everyone in that Philistine camp when he took the Ark of the Covenant back? He just fetched it. He had the power to. I don't think they would have been very smart to try anything serious. And even if there was a skirmish, he didn't wipe out every conceivable Gentile in that location. So what I'm saying to you is, depending on the posture you took, you could either, yes, be against Israel, and you could have tried to get it back. You wouldn't have gotten it back. You would have died trying. Or you could have said, watch this, I'm a Gentile. I surrender to the power of your God, and for whatever reason he's chosen you, David, and your people, what do I do to draw near? You have that option.
Mm-hmm.
And we have evidence of Gentiles doing that even in the Gospels, they do it. And what's my point? It's back to that temple image. Has to be in Jerusalem. And so everything has to be then. The other point to note, which is not only encouraging to Gentiles, as I've said now, the other point to note is that besides the blessing, there's the negative side for Israel. And what was the negative side? During that period, Israel lost blessing, right? Was it permanent? No. We can narrow it down to when we had the ark and when we lost the ark. But watch this. I can therefore ask, is there a pattern in Jewish history where Israel gets the blessing, acts irresponsibly in various ways, loses the blessing, because we do, but what inevitably happens every time? We get it back. That's the whole of the Old Testament for Christians that are reading what I call Tanakh. Right? So here's my question to that Christian. Why are you so sure that just because we've lost it again that it's not coming back? If you see our whole history is full of that. And in fact, if God doesn't bring it back, if God doesn't bring the temple back, he's a fraud. Because he's the one that makes the covenant. It is Hashem, God, who says, as long as there's day and night, there's seasons, Israel will not cease to be a nation before me. So ultimately, when Christians are saying, oh, the temple's not coming back, they don't realize what they're actually saying is they're questioning God's credibility. Because if that temple doesn't come back, it's against God's credibility, not Israel's. And that's what's important for Christians to grasp. That's his doing. That's God's, it's upheld by God's covenant, not by Israel. So my point being, has the temple been gone for over 2,000 years? Yes. Am I devastatedly worried? No. Am I sad? Yes. That's why when I go to Israel, I pray at the wall. But I know Yeshua is the Messiah. I know Jesus is returning. I don't think Jesus is coming for the first time. I think he's coming for the second time. But why do I still want the temple? Well, because the temple is the mark of God's presence in the land he's chosen. Do I understand punishment? Yes. Do I believe my people collectively, all of us as Israel, the 12 tribes, do I believe we are collectively under a curse right now, having lost something as part of the punishment that's ongoing since Jesus ascended? Yes, of course. And I suffer with the rest of my people in that way. But do I know the temple's returning? Yes. Is that counter to Jesus? No. I mean, if we get into that, we'll get very great sidetracked, but we would get sidetracked from the story of Hanukkah. But my point being, the story of Israel is filled with highs and lows, partially because we have such a heavy burden on us to carry to bring the light to the nations, and I fully accept that responsibility. Even at the cost of my own life, I accept that responsibility. So there's that. But also in that process, this is what's a double-edged sword for us Jews, is that God also gets to show the nations his own credibility by saying, I'm even willing to chastise my own son or daughter, Israel, however you want to see us, because I'm that credible. I love them with a love that can't be reversed. But because they represent me so emphatically, when they misstep, I will allow calamity to touch them. Now, never will calamity wipe us out completely, but that doesn't mean large swaths of us can't and haven't been taken out in the midst of this ebb and flow of our calling, right? Because that's happened. Now, there's also two sources, and this is where it gets really difficult as a Jew to deal with this reality, is either God can punish us directly, like he directly does it. What's the most obvious long-standing version of that? It is literally the loss of the temple for now. The loss of the temple leaves an aching in a Jewish heart. Doesn't kill our hope. There's something missing. Even though I've got Jesus, there's still something missing. The temple's missing. And that's no slight on Jesus. He called the temple his Father's house. So you'd be right there with me about how this is. That's why Jesus laments when he says in Matthew 24, that until where you welcome me back, this house will be left desolate. The temple. He laments. Why is he lamenting if he's happy that the temple's gone? It's because he's not happy. That's not what he wants. So that's what God does, and we get punished in that way. Like any child gets punished, and we're still under that punishment. There's no doubt. That punishment will be lifted, then the temple will return. But here's the other side too to note. Sometimes the powers of darkness do just get a chance to hit back at us. And that's where we have stories like Hanukkah. That's where we've got stories of the Holocaust, the pogroms, because there is a real spiritual warfare. And they know that we are the light to the nations. And they will do what they can. Now let's ask, why would God allow people to die if they are innocent? That's obviously not a very logical question to ask in the context of believing Jesus is the Messiah, that we believe God let his own son die to redeem. So Christians understand martyrdom as they should, but what are they actually understanding? They're actually understanding a Jewish concept. Again, that's what they're understanding. Martyrdom is not Christian. Martyrdom is actually Jewish. And that's why I say again, if you study Hanukkah properly, the bloodshed and the courage of Jews not to give up their identity will overwhelm you in a good way. Okay, so you've got that too. The next thing is, in Judaism, do we see death physically the same way the nations see death? No, we don't. In fact, if you ask me what death is, what am I most likely to tell you? It's sleeping. I don't think you die. If you've dropped dead, God forbid one of us drops dead on this podcast right now, I don't think we're dead. I think we're just sleeping until the resurrection. And why do I point that out? Because death is a loss and it's terrible. It's not what God intended, so we mourn it. Obviously we do. Jews have a very complicated system of mourning for that reason. But also this, we have a moment where we stop mourning for the death of a loved one. There's a period of time we do, and there's a period where we stop, and then we just remember them after that in various ways. My point being, it's not the end of the world if people die in Judaism. And what I mean by that is, because we know this isn't the world we belong to. You know, this is the Olam Hazeh, this is the world now, but we look forward to the Olam Haba, the world to come. Now, why do I tell you that? It's because, yes, over 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, millions of Jews killed across Israel's history and into the pogroms and into Hanukkah and all of that. Millions. I mean, we probably can't figure the number out. Why do we not see that ultimately as a defeat? Why do we not see that as a reason of God's unfaithfulness? Because we know we have to lay our lives down as Jews, as priests to the nations, as servants to the nations and to God. Yet, things like Hanukkah, whenever I hear of a shooting at a synagogue or some attack on Israel in some place of the world, which is constantly happening, I get terribly heart sore. I do, because I wonder, well, is it my family's turn next? You know, inevitably but yet that's still part of Judaism, if that makes sense to you. Like, it's what we have to embrace. And again, I think about it when Christians talk about being martyrs, where are they getting the idea from? They're getting the idea from the Gospels, right? And when you're getting the idea from the Gospels, where you're actually getting it from? A Jewish text. It were Jews that were dying, and still are to this day. And so it's, for me especially, Caleb, when it comes to Hanukkah time, I make an effort of telling my kids, understand that you might have to die one day for being Jewish. Not because you did anything wrong to anyone, just because you are Jewish. That's a difficult one to sell to kids and make them happy about it. Like, hey, here's this time that we celebrate, we survived almost being killed, but we've got to remind ourselves tomorrow might be the day that we need to be boldly willing to die because we are Jewish doing God's work. And you still need to be inspired by that. And that's kind of part of what Hanukkah does in a way.
Wow, yeah, really well articulated, just these concepts that come from Judaism. And on sort of this topic about people who or the Jewish soul at times needing to lay down their life. We just witnessed the Bondi Beach shooting, and I think it was 12, 14 people who were killed. There was a rabbi killed, and I think there was a Holocaust survivor that was
Yes.
killed. Really, really tragic situation. We're praying for these people and their families. Darren, what would your encouragement be when people for your Jewish people for these situations? How do you encourage people when these things happen?
Well, when I got the news and I saw it very early on, just after it happened, I was in such a good mood. It was Hanukkah, getting ready to celebrate, telling the stories to my kids, preparing stuff. And then this news broke of a Hanukkah attack. And obviously I was disheartened. I was heartbroken because I thought again, okay, Australia and New Zealand, we are kind of literally on the edge of the earth. I mean, you can't get much farther away from other civilizations if you tried. And even as far as Australia, on Bondi Beach, there are still people that want to massacre us. And what makes it worse in a way, in a small way makes it worse, is that these guys literally targeted a Hanukkah event. Bondi Beach or Bondi area is heavily concentrated with the Jewish community. So this wasn't random. This wasn't just two guys looking to be terrorists that just happened to accidentally fall upon a couple of Jews. This was that intentional. And I bet, listen, Caleb, I bet you they chose that time and that place because they figured out what Hanukkah actually means. I don't think it was an accident. I think it was very intentional that they did that on Hanukkah, because what Hanukkah celebrates in part, as I've said, is the ongoing existence of Jewish culture for the world, a light to the world. That's why there's the menorah, all of that's going on. So they did this intentionally. And is it tragic? Of course it's tragic. And I'm, like I said, my heart has been heavy the whole time about this. And Because I can't help but think, what if my family was there? We would have gone to that celebration. No doubt. Would I have lost my kids, myself? Now, I say that because it's fair for any human being to wonder about that, and that's not what you hope for. You don't hope for that. But then I've also got to stop, Caleb, and I've got to say, is this unique? Are Jews being killed for being Jewish? Is that a unique thing? No, it's not. Okay. If I say I know so much about Hanukkah and that's what it's about, can I lament permanently on what happened? No. Do I lament? Yes, because any loss of life is worth lamenting over. Yet, at the same time, were those people's lives absolutely in vain? No. They wouldn't have died if they weren't acknowledging Hanukkah. And if they knew what Hanukkah is, they know that this is one of the craziest times in our history. We had to survive trying to be wiped out by an invading threat. Now, if you ask them, hey, what would you like for Hanukkah this year? Oh, I'd love to be shot dead on the beach. No, I don't think anyone would say that. But are their lives actually in vain? No. Because even if it is just for a short period of time, Caleb, doesn't happen often, but it looks like the world's starting to realize that maybe the Jews aren't treated fairly with this absolutely outrageously unique targeting of this place. And what makes it even stranger, a father and son, and seeing all the plotting they did before they got into this. It's not accidental. In fact, I mean, I can't verify this absolutely, but watching the story unfold from in various ways, it appears, I can't guarantee this, but it appears that I think it might have been the son is actually seen before the attack, trying to ask people not to come near the beach. Now you might think, what? But he was shooting people. Yes, but just consider this theory. If he sees you walking along the beach and you're not part of the festivities, his assumption could be you're not Jewish, right? And if he's not trying to shoot you dead, which he wasn't, then he's going to be like a nice guy to you, Caleb. You're not Jewish. You should stay away. This isn't going to go down well. Which only makes it even more sickening if that's true, right? Because if you think about that, he's got the kindness to tell Caleb the Gentile to move away from the beach before he shoots a 10-year-old girl dead.
Yeah, that's twisted.
You get what I'm saying? Now, I can't verify that's it, but I don't even need it to be the case. The fact is, this man didn't shoot up a mall in, Sydney somewhere or in some remote desert part of Australia. They went to the densely populated Jewish space in Bondi, and not just even that. Caleb, how many beach shootings have you heard about in your lifetime? Because I've never heard of one before this one.
I haven't heard of one either.
Which makes it even more weird. Mall shootings, yes, sad, but they tend to happen. At rallies, yes, sad, but they happen. In schools, sad, but they happen. On a beach. What I'm saying to you is, look how intentional that was. You went to a Hanukkah celebration. You literally went to a Hanukkah celebration. That's deliberate. Now, next very dangerous question. Should Jews like myself, especially with family, should we hide our Jewishness because of this that happens? The knee-jerk reaction would be yes. Because there's the heightened, aggravated sense of Jewish attack again, right? But according to Hanukkah, what should the answer be? No. You shine the light. That's what you do. And I watched this morning a Jewish mother on social media that was talking very emotional, because it would be emotional, about her kids asking, Mom, shouldn't we just lay low? Shouldn't we not watch this? Shouldn't we rather not light the Hanukkah candles this year? And traditionally, what do we do? For me, it's difficult to, because we don't have a window that really looks perfectly because our house is so gated in. The tradition is to put your Hanukkah, the menorah, out where the people can see it, that they know you're a Jewish family, or that you're at least celebrating Hanukkah or commemorating it. And so we don't really have a place to put it. Otherwise I'd have to put it outside and then it will just blow out in the wind. But I don't hide who I am. This mother said to the kids, no, this is even more reason to shine the Hanukkah, to light the Hanukkah candles. Now just imagine what that mother's actually teaching their child. Yes, Bondi happened, and that's exactly why we must keep lighting the candles. Because that's who we are.
Hmm.
Effectively, it's almost like, it's not suicidal because you're not taking your own life, but it's almost like accepting a death wish. It's like saying, no, part of being Jewish is to be potentially victimized in this way. Now, can anyone sit down and say, oh, this is why we must hate Jews? Because no, it just comes down to because we're Jewish, and that point becomes spiritual because we are the light to the nations. That's it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to make sense. It's a spiritual attack. And that's the same for me. Do I think mine and my family's life is worth being lost because we are Jewish? Yes. I think that's the highest sacrifice we can make, is to die because we are Jewish. Do we go looking for it? No, that's stupid. But if it comes to us, literally, Caleb, again, if you study the martyrdom of Hanukkah, you'd be shocked to see what has happened and what's been done to people. But that's it. Jews have to stand up and be Jewish. So do I mourn what's happened? Yes. Do I have a sense of fear for my own family? Yes. Where now doesn't matter, but I'll give you an example. At a job I was at, there was let's just say there was a space where you could do graffiti really easily. Okay? Let's just say that. And because that was an area I controlled in my job, it wasn't too surprising one day to see like very crude pictures drawn of male genitalia, and then a swastika sign clearly directed at me. I've had other stuff done too. Do I fall into a ball and feel sorry for myself? No. Is it fair? No. Do I want it to happen? No. But at the end of the day, what do I say? I say, you know what? Bring it on. You're not going to stop me from being who I am. And that's the story of Hanukkah again, in a way. So, honestly, as tragic as it is, once I've dealt with the mourning process of it, Caleb, I'm proud of the people at Bondi. I'm proud of the martyrs, if that makes sense. I'm proud that even though their lives were taken from them, it was taken from them because they were doing what Jews are supposed to do, be a light and celebrate being Jewish. I can't think of a better reason to go. And absolutely the people left behind are mourning and there's loss. Not underplaying that at all. No one can take that away. That's part of the sacrifice, is the suffering. So, yes, it's sad. Was I expecting this Hanukkah to be marked by this? No, of course not. And you know, it's the crazy part that I've noticed already. No one who knows the Bondi area and who knows it's famous for that beach and the surf spot that it is, no one can ever think of Bondi Beach again and now not attach it to a massacre done to Jews. And that's sad and good, right? It's sad because a beautiful memory that needs to be a beautiful piece of God's creation like that beach that has to now have a negative attachment. But Caleb, on the other side, it sobered a lot of people up, right? Like I said to you, people around the world have acknowledged this and seen this and know that it's related to Jews and all of that. And they've already done memorial actions there. I pray to God that it doesn't fizzle out because it's just an emotional high for 1 year. I hope that people remember it for all time to come, that this is the beach that people were shot at just because they're Jewish. And for that to intrigue people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Just reminding Jewish people like this. While it's sad, it's we get to also, I say we, the Jewish people get to also partake in an opportunity to be a light to people. And while we don't look for the martyrdom, we when it comes as an opportunity to show people who the Jewish people are. I think
That's
it's a
it.
great message.
I want to correct you, though, in a positive way and say to you, you do celebrate this with us. You're a believer in Yeshua.
Mhm.
Caleb, you're not just one of the people that are aimlessly wandering around Bondi Beach that had no idea what's going on. They saw menorah and walked past. What's that? That's weird. I haven't seen a candle like that before. Like, you're not that guy. You would have been the guy that got onto that beach because you're like, man, I'm here with you. I have a savior because of you. And let's
Yeah.
be honest, I haven't gotten all the names of the people. I guarantee you, Caleb, that there will be Christians who are either shot at, injured, or whatever, because they associated intentionally with Hanukkah on that beach. I guarantee you. Which means that's another good story, right? Because if any Gentiles were celebrating with Jews, as they should, then it's working. Then we're actually doing the work. So that's why I'm saying to you, you are absolutely part of it. Caleb, I've always told people this. If there weren't Gentiles and people to share and serve for me as a Jew, then why would I exist? Right? And if no
Good point.
Gentiles ever picked it up, then what's the power of it? It's useless. Like that saying goes, and I love this saying, if you go out leading something and you want to lead this big revolution, right? And you go out walking and you're just walking confidently, but you look behind you and no one's behind you, then you're not doing a revolution. You are just going for a walk on your own. And that's pretty useless if you think you're leading a revolution. And that's the point. So the fact that you even care to know about Hanukkah, the fact that you are even studying with a rabbi, all of that, what does that tell you? It tells you that no matter how many gunmen want to come and try what they want, can they actually stop the move of God? No, they can't. Hanukkah on the beach, Caleb. Not hidden away in a dungeon. Hanukkah on the beach. That's how confident Jews are. Now watch this. Do you think those Jews had not heard of the Holocaust, the pogroms of the original Hanukkah? Like no one told them that people don't like Jews? Of course they knew. They were literally celebrating the fact that we don't back down. So yes, the loss of life is tragic. It's terrible to think that you can't go onto a beach without potentially getting shot at. That is ridiculous, obviously. But there's a other side to the story, is that those lives weren't in vain. It's brought attention to the terrorism problem that is as far as Australia. So to me, that's a positive to say, okay, Wald, are you ready to wake up yet? Are you ready to realize that terrorism is against Jews unfairly, and they will follow us anywhere in the world? And that's part of what I hope becomes a political shift, if it can, in the next days, weeks, months, and even years. But we'd have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, it's a really good message, and no, thank you for inviting me into that. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's what a great conversation, Rabbi Darin. Just be the light and look for hope and be a hope to somebody. I think that's the
Right.
great
And
message.
again, I'm glad that you accept the invitation, because it's almost I'm not even inviting you in, Caleb. You kind of already have been having some punch and some finger snacks and enjoying the music. And then you're like, oh man, I'd really love to join your party. And I'm like, Caleb, yeah. What do you mean? You in it. You are not outside of this. And that's probably another message that is what I promote about Hanukkah. You're not on the outside. You are in the inside with us. And that's why I encourage you to pick up Hanukkah as you have in any case. So thank you for justifying my Jewish existence. If there were no Calebs to talk to me and want to learn from me, then I don't know why I exist. There's no point.
Yeah, no, really well articulated. Rabbi Darin, this conversation has been really, really great. Where could people find you?
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm working quite extensively on reshaping our ministry content that's available online. So I would say for now, it would have to be at the website. Let me just make sure that I've got the active working domain before I tell you, and then it gets them nowhere. So let's just make sure I get that right. Yeah. I had to check properly. So anyone can use studyontheway.teachable.com to get to On the Way International's current ministry space, where there are some stuff for Hanukkah still on. Actually, I'll probably leave it on for a bit. And then obviously the Strange Gospel podcast that you're aware of already too. So yeah, I would say that. I'd say so. It is still, this might change in the future, but I'll get the information out when it does. Study on the Way International, sorry, not international, sorry, studyontheway.teachable.com would be the easiest way for people to get hold of where the ministry is operating right now. So yeah, it would be that for them to have a look at.
Perfect. I'll have that description, or I'll have that link in the description, and I'll have that below in the comments for you guys if you want to check out Rabbi Darin's stuff. He's also written a couple of books. Jesus in Context is still on Amazon. I'll give you guys a link to that as well. Highly recommend you guys take a look at that. Rabbi Darin, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really great to talk to you.
Thank you. It was great.